So I guess we are here again to take a funny stick or a silly stick and poke it at the Shan regime and tell them to get back. But just in case they don't get back, which they're not, since I have been using of late the term very often intelligence, and specifically new intelligence, talking about just a hint, a frivolous hint, an ad hoc, temporary, conditional definition by usage, hint as to what this kind of activity may be about, don't you think it's about time that you pondered what might be the reality that I am trying to point at behind even the basic term intelligence? And several ways would seem pertinent for your consideration that might reveal, at least to reveal the fact that you never thought about what intelligence was. So beyond that, I'll leave it to you unless I decide to point out otherwise. But I would ask you first to consider intelligence. Now just take intelligence now that I'm not saying new intelligence, but just the intelligence that we'll say for the time being differentiates man from all other creatures of whom you can be sensually aware. Is intelligence a personal in-here thing, or is it a general out-there thing? Now, a general out-there thing, the intelligence of others, for instance, because their intelligence certainly is not your intelligence, right? Because you and everybody else is separate. So whatever your intelligence may be would be one thing, but there is some kind of other intelligence, right? The general out there. And you could even look at it, if you can stretch it a bit in the beginning even, the intelligence of collections of people, shorthand institutions. But there would seem to be the intelligence of the church, the intelligence of your government, the intelligence of your county commission, the intelligence of your family, the intelligence of your society, your culture, your race. Can you grasp right quick, so I don't have to lay on that for a working mapping you could, not improperly, perceive temporarily that there is two kinds of intelligence visible, perceivable. There is your personal, your individual intelligence, which is in here. However it got there, it's in there. But then there is a more general, although you could say that each other person must have some sort of similarity to you of a kind of specific personal intelligence. And yet that's not the way you think about it, if you had thought about it in this way. What you think of is your personal intelligence, and then, which is in here, and then out there is a more general, a diffused, a less specific intelligence. Humanity in general, subclassifications, institutions. If you can, in a more highly defined manner, deal with bifocal sight, you would take one eye and turn it on what seems to be individual intelligence in here, and the other eye on what would seem to be the general, non-personal intelligence external to you, and then you would see where they overlap and you would strike it rich. That is getting close to what I refer to as new intelligence. It is not really the new intelligence, but it is the sailing from the old world toward a new territory. It is expanding even the basis of what is now your present intelligence. But it has to be where it seems that your individual, your personal, your private intelligence overlaps. All of you still remember when I started at one time just pointing out how sight works, bifocal sight, and how there is the overlapping. And I pointed out that metaphorically, and even more so, which I don't want to deal with right now, that the overlap is where you would find something interesting. Now, in the same way that I can describe that, we could refer to this as personal in here intelligence, and this is general out there intelligence. But where they overlap is what is never taken into consideration in the way in which I'm speaking, because where they overlap to ordinary intelligence appears to be what? Conflict. And it could be described, and has been described internally by all manners of people, in even a more disruptive manner than just conflict. It could be called either blatant or burgeoning ignorance. That is, where your intelligence begins to overlap with the lack of intelligence in other people. And you're in for a bad dance, a bad time, a sticky wicket. There's going to be some hours there in that afternoon tea wherein someone's going to pour the cream in your lap. It is seen as being anything other than potentially profitable. It is some sort of confrontation, conflict, struggle. I'm here to tell somebody, if not you, somebody. I'm here to tell you otherwise. That where they overlap, it's a secret bus station. It is like a parallel Cape Canaveral. It is a 5-dimension version of the Hammond Map Company. And of course, certainly in this case, outside of New Jersey. And few people didn't know it, one of the largest map companies in the world. I don't know what to make of that, but the Hammond Company is in New Jersey. And up to now, I've always trusted their maps. But let me ask you further to consider this. Is intelligence an object or a process? Should we take a moment and everyone mull that over? Can you see from one eye that it could be strongly supported that intelligence is a thing, an object, a noun? But from another eye, you would see that intelligence could be seen as being a verb, a process. At any given time, if you attempted to consider the matter in this light, you could look at your intelligence and what seems to be the out there general intelligence. At any particular time, you could look at it in a certain manner, and if you could even get some perceptive grasp on what would be intelligence at that moment, the operations thereof, it could look like an object, it could look like a noun, the way in which you thought about it, because you think in sentences. I guess some of you already discovered that. If you don't, but you think in sentences, and at times, if you ever think to yourself the word intelligence, somebody else's intelligence, according to how the energy flows through you, you put it together in the sentence of what the dialogue is running through you, and you refer to intelligence, and in one sentence it is a noun. What did those fuckers use for intelligence that did this to my car, did this to my stereo, did this to my comforter? Then again, you could take what would seem to be almost the same circumstances a second later, and the dialogue in you would refer to intelligence as a process. None of this, of course, should come as any sort of secret, since I continue to point out, if you don't do it on your own, that whatever is perceptible through the 5 senses in the 3D world is perceivable as operating in duplicate. there is not one of anything, not anything that ordinary people consider worthwhile, because they could not perceive it as actually being part of life if it did not have its duplicate, its evil twin or its sweet twin, its anonym or its synonym. But could I suggest to you that the notion, even of seeing intelligence as being at times a noun, and at other times your own dialogue tells you it is a process, that the question itself is based on a faulty premise. There is a place where intelligence, consider this a hyphenated phrase, where intelligence the noun, intelligence the object, overlaps with, hyphenated, intelligence the process. Should I try and indicate that it's some sort of mystical, strange, weird place where this overlaps, and perhaps even words can't begin to describe it? Or perhaps it is so routine that no one wants to consider the fact that the cosmic forces may be manifested in sliced white bread, just right before your very eyes. The fact is, I know I'm moving through this and not even stopping as I normally do to confuse you further, but intelligence does not exist just in man or just in the world, either as a noun or a process. It does not. It cannot. What it does is it exists as a bond between the two. I didn't stop a few minutes ago when I was saying you could look at intelligence as being an object and you could look at it as being a process. Now, I said that, but I don't know how you'd do that. Did anybody notice? See, it was one of the trick questions, trick rhapsodies again, that is not the same played forward or backwards. It's a trick that I learned from a weird uncle of Johann Sebastian Bach of turning him. The fugue does not play the same way forward and backwards. But it would seem, didn't you all go for it? I just pointed out that it was so obvious I didn't even stay there, that intelligence can be seen as being an object. But then again, you can look at almost the same circumstance, or the same circumstance a bit later, and you can see intelligence as being a process. Nobody got up and left. But now I'm here to tell you, we've waited, what, 5 or 6 minutes? You can't look at it that way. None of you did. You may have tried. You may have thought, well, boy, this is one of the times that you should have stopped and given some examples. It sounds all right. That surely you can. That intelligence, I'm sure, is listed in the dictionary. Then I think about it under, it can be a noun or a verb. But you can't see it that way, regardless of the fact that I said you could. Where is intelligence? Do I have to take it back to this level? Is intelligence something that we can go put our hands on? If it is a noun, if it is an object, where is it? Where is it? Is it in books? Is it in universities? Is it in somebody else? Is it now in your brain? If so, could it be cut out? Can it be extracted? Could you be infirmed? Could you be injured in such a way that does not simply make you less than ordinarily conscious, not that, but a piece of your brain actually gets hurt, falls out, and gets cut, and there it is, and by God, there is the multiplication tables. There is where you knew all the capitals of the United States, of course, except for North and South Dakota, which nobody knows. Is knowledge, is intelligence the same thing as knowledge? Because people will say, well, knowledge is in books, knowledge is in those who know it. Intelligence, is it an object? All right. That is rather viscid, is it not? All right, is it a process? All right, if it's a process, then there's some beginning to it, there's some ending to it, or there's some middle part, there's some kind of working premise, an operational premise that you can get intelligence going, or you can go somewhere and say, I'd like to get some intelligence going in me, or I'd like to get whatever I've got, speed it up. How can I go about it? Where do we start? Think about it a second. Does anybody know? Now, don't take an easy way out and say, well, you should go out and get more education if you're trying to be more intelligent. It's not the same thing. If intelligence is a process, it's in some way definable, describable, measurable, and forget IQ test. Could I suggest to you that rather than it existing as a noun or a process either in here or out there, that intelligence is a bond. Intelligence is the operational working area between what seems to be you personally and what seems to be life generally. It's been called other things, but if you will try and pursue this, I think that you will find, if I may suggest, that I have narrowed it down in an exhilarating manner. Because all of the other definitions are too old worldly. They're too outdated, moldy. But intelligence is the very place where you apparently interface with what is apparently not you. It is the bonding agent between, I'm talking about an ordinary, sophisticated, just everyday person, between such a person and life itself. Think about it. Without intelligence, what would you have? You can lose your legs. You can lose some of the operations of your limbic system. You can have severe nerve damage. You can be a quadriplegic, whether you lost your limbs or not. But you are still a human if you have got the interface, if you have got the bond between you and life on the basis of intelligence. You would still qualify as a human. Take that away. But you're still physically, the motor skills are still there. You still look healthy. You still look muscular. You still react to pain. But the intellect is not operating. You no longer have that bond between you and life. Would you then be a human? You would be, may I suggest, laid out for all intents and purposes and be a healthy looking kumquat, a large squash. You're a vegetable. You are not human without the bond of the intellect. How about I pretend sidestep for a second? Try and hear this. I'm going to take an easy, pretty common example that probably a lot of you have the general basis of being involved with, more so perhaps than me, but I know enough. Let me point this out. But now listen to the way I'm describing it. In the general field of science fiction, if ordinary people, those who write movies, books, if they were indeed intelligent at the level that even the dictionary says that ordinary people should be intelligent. In other words, if they were my fripp, my fictitious, reasonably insane person, that is, an ordinary person that can have some extraordinary insights, then those who either write and produce film, science fiction stories, or people who read them, would note that there is a egregious flaw in all the villains, all the alternative life forms, because every science fiction movie I've ever caught any glimpse of, which is not all that different from all other fiction, But constantly there's got to be a villain. And they continually come up with alternative life forms of villains, evildoers. There is a flaw in all of them. Does anybody have any idea what it is? All of them. I mean, I've never seen all of them, but I'm sure there would be. They can stage, they can write, they can spend millions of dollars on special effects. They can apparently have some psychological subplot going on. And it's a creature that comes in as a spore from some meteorite, or it's some egg that comes in from another solar system. And anyway, this alternative life form finally begins to interact with the humans on the spaceship, on the wherever. And that becomes, but I admit one more time, I know that they believe oftentimes that they would think that that's one of the distinguishing characteristics, and I'm sure, and probably some of you do, of science fiction, is they would get into psychological parallels or subplots about the creature. The alternative life form, the villain. There is a flaw always in that. I was killing time to let some of you try to chase down what it is. Now I'm saying a flaw. Of course in life everything's working correctly. But just based upon where ordinary intelligence, the level of intelligence of humanity now, this has not caught up, which is not surprising once I start pointing out to you how it's connected. I guess it'll become more than a side step now that I think about it a little further ahead of it. The flaw is this. Now listen. Now remember, I'm playing with justice because there is no flaw. Those who write and produce science fiction books and magazines and movies are doing just fine. They don't need me, and I'm not a critic. But their alternative life forms, villainous, that is, miss something consistently, and I'm going to tell you why. You see, first you don't even see what the flaw is. Here's the flaw. The alternative life form, to be a villain, has to represent a potential conqueror. I mean, if the alternative life form, villainous, comes flying in, or somebody brings it in on their foot after they've been on a spacewalk, and it's a little bitty thing, and somebody says, ooh, that could be dangerous, and they smack it, and it goes boom, and dies, and it's like a fly, and that's the end of the movie. So, for the movie, or the book, for the story to have dramatic content, like ordinary people's lives, there has to be a nemesis, at least, a villain. And these creatures, I see them all the way from little things to huge things, visible, invisible, made out of metal, combined with metals and polyurethane, just all kinds of stuff. But there's one great serious lack that nobody notices in the villainous alternative life forms. Is that enough build-up suspense? But when I tell you, I'm going to have to go ahead and jump on. I'm going to press on and try and get you to see why. There's a reason. What is lacking is this. The scene is set up, and it's these, let's say it's some people from Earth. And they're progressed to the point that they're on this spaceship and they're out traveling in the universe, and in some way this alternative life form slips on board. Let's put it that way to keep the scenario down. And this thing grows right quicker, just suddenly blossoms out, and it begins killing the people. And they don't know what to do. Now, so we're talking about the scene's already set a few years in forward history for the ordinary mind, and yet the humans cannot deal with this villain, this alternative life form. But what does the alternative life form always lack? Always. Ordinary intelligence. Think about it. That somewhere in the universe, now this is what life allows ordinary people to think about mentally, that here's this thing, it's got teeth made out of steel. You try to kill it, and when you poke it, an acid pours out of it so that it's almost, you can't beat it. It'll kill you, it'll tear up the ship if you try to kill it. It's almost a fail-safe villain. Except the sons of bitches never have any intelligence up to the level of humans. Now listen, when I said that ordinary intelligences see that flaw, everything that ordinary intelligence can see, can think about, tells it, whether it's ever used my terms or not, it tells it that as life evolves, after it reaches a certain physical dimension, its strength, its defense mechanisms, its hostility, its anger, if it develops any further past that, once it can function at that level and find its own place in the food chain, that it eats and it gets it, and there's a balance in there somewhere, after that, what happens? Of course, humans only see that humans have done it, but the next thing is inescapable. It develops an intellect. Now, some of these creatures seem to show some intellect. Some can even apparently talk. But they have, do you hear me? They have progressed in a way that the human mind cannot reasonably defend. That is, they did not progress further on intellectually, even if they started any intellectual development. They didn't go any further. They're no better off than the humans that they're confronting. And usually they're less intelligent, apparently. What has happened is an exaggeration. It's like they went off on a mutant trip of their own, and their primitive, lower abilities became exaggerated. That is, that they are stronger than all humans. Instead of blood, they have sulfuric acid. And their jaw pressure is like 40,000 tons per square inch. That they can just bite humans and eat them up. But you realize that is no better than humans were doing 2,500 years ago, believing in God and Lucifer and actual demons loose on the earth. That's all it is. They are not worthy adversaries. They are not true villainous alternative life forms. Now you can say they are. They can be presented, but you hear what I'm saying? There is nothing right now in the human intellect, just ordinary, that can support that. Everything that the human intellect knows is going to a certain level that creatures all the way from possums to hippopotamuses to humans, they develop to a certain stable level physically. The motor skills, their defense mechanism, we just consider just physically. After that, if they're going to go anywhere else, they start developing this. And if they're going, once this gets going, if they're going to develop anywhere else, this would begin to go. And humans do not see that flaw. They don't know what to make of it. They never thought about it. What they do is move backwards, which is impossible. It does not happen in life. But they have taken, let us say that this alternative life form has some intellect. It can talk. So it's got some intellect. It can talk to the people, the humans there. But then how does it present its threat? Not through this. Through the fact that it can chew them up. It can do the same kinds of things that a mountain lion can do to a human. That an elephant can do, can sit on you. That is its threat. It's not even going backwards. It's going off sideways in a three-dimensional world, and it does not happen. It is a faulty, an absolutely flawed alternative life form. It is not villainous. It is going back sideways and blowing up more primitive. Not more threatening, more primitive. Not more advanced, more primitive of their activities, their abilities. Now, when I was thinking about stepping off this far sideways, I'm going to have to point out, or I'm going to, the electrochemical basis of this. The ordinary intellect cannot deal, cannot perceive of a creature. It doesn't have to be just an alternative life form. I'm going to bring it closer to home. Cannot deal of another creature, human or otherwise, with a functioning intellect, as far as they can tell, who has the intellect going and then plots evil. The ordinary intellect cannot get any grasp on the possibility, is that, of course, it's a faulty premise to start with, but as they would see it, they cannot get any grasp upon the possibility, it just does not exist, that there could be willful D-force activity. Therefore, they cannot be villains. They can't really take it up to the ordinary level of humans. When villainous acts occurs, now forget alternative life forms in life. When there is, according to ordinary people, true, as they call it, truly evil, villainous men that come upon the scene of ordinary life, how are they looked at? At the time, after the fact, they are never given credit. It's just, it doesn't arise. They consider that these people, the Attilas, were just so primitive that we can't call them intelligent. Either that or the guy probably had some kind of advanced case of syphilis before they knew who it was, cerebral paresis, a Hitler, a Genghis Khan, anybody that just seems to be truly, I'm just using other people's definition, of truly evil. They are never looked on as being ordinarily intelligent. They are in some way deranged. They are not looked at as being just ordinarily intelligent, and that they sat down in some way and plotted to do evil. Ordinary intellect, I repeat one more time, especially you people on tape for the other times and other places getting this, I'm using the terms. These are not my terms. Evil means nothing. But they use the term. And it seems to be meaningful in life. But no one can grasp, no one can put any sort of intellectual handle on a possibility. It just doesn't arise. They don't discuss it. That some villain over here, some mad dog killer, some serial killer, some guy walked in and shot 7 innocent people, and then walked out and went to McDonald's when they arrested him, and he just acted like nothing. No one ever considers the fact that he could be, as they would call it, normal. And sure enough, normally there'll be some sort of proof that he's not. Psychiatrists will talk to him, they'll check his family background. At any rate, the proof is not the point. It's just immediately that people will go, Jesus, what could cause somebody to do that? Ordinary intelligence cannot perceive a real villainy. It cannot perceive a real villainy on an equal footing with itself. It cannot perceive of, remember what I used to refer to it as D-forces. There being 3 forces going on, interacting, bonding together, overlapping. Of C, which would seem to be a creative kind of force, a good force, as people would ordinarily call it. And there seems to be a D force, kind of a destructive, in an ad hoc relative way to the other force, C, that people would think of as being evil. And then I pointed out to you that what I was calling an E force, which in relationship to the first 2 in any given instance would seem to be irrelevant. It seems to be everything not concerned with the forces here of C and D, of good and evil, of right and wrong, of progressive and regressive. The human intellect cannot perceive of D force, it's evil. Cannot conceive of it operating in some willful, planned manner. It just can't be. It's got to be an anomaly. And anybody who would seem to be involved, from their judgment, whoever it is, that they are villainous, they are less than ordinarily human. That is, they are less than possessed of ordinary intelligence. Thus, even in science fiction, where supposedly imagination has full reign, they cannot perceive of, even an alternative life, form of life, didn't even come from this solar system. Turn your imagination loose, you great writers. So it's something you've never even seen. And here it comes, and it begins to wrestle with men. And what is it? They can paint it green, they can paint it purple, they can put 12 eyes on it. But the thing always has not developed any further intellectually than the people it's combating, and probably less. But in some strange way, it has developed teeth that can crush Goldfinger's hand, where it has developed the ability to swell up and frighten everybody to death. But its villainous intent is never here. Now, I have pointed out some of this in other ways before, but let me point out something else to you. There's not all that great deal of interest in what would seem to be C-force actors. How much can people stand to hear about Albert Schweitzer? Or how long would you watch a movie about Mother Teresa? How popular would it be in comic books to do St. Francis of Assisi sitting around? Of course, we all know in ordinary life you'd get more people, as you're supposed to, or we'd all have a reason to be nervous. You'd have more people say, well, listen, I would much rather see a movie on the life of Mother Teresa than I would Adolf Hitler. Well, I guess if they forced me to, I probably would too. But so what? But do you see that, on the contrary, if you say, well, I can't conceive of having any interest in deranged people, mad dog killers. Who wants to see a movie about the life of some murderer? All right? Then would you like to go see a movie about a near living saint? Well, not really. You know what people want to see? They don't understand it. They want to see where they overlap. That's what literature is. That's what movies are. That's what drama is. That's what suspense is. It's where those two overlap, and they're always overlapping, but no one identifies it. They will talk about it. Life will make them intellectually talk about pure strains of good and evil. Saints, sinners, heroes, villains. But if you are confronted with the possibility that you can be entertained, you can consider being entertained by a presentation, movie, book, etc., through some institution over here of all evilness. It gives me the blues. It's spooky. Who wants to see all that? All right, how about we'll see nothing but just forever little runs about near living saints, famous, non-famous. How much of that can you take? There's no great demand for that. People want a little action. Where is action? Action is where things overlap. If they are not overlapping, you're not going to find much of an audience. You're not going to find a stable audience. As long as I sidestep this far, how about a little more sidestep? When you seem to get caught individually, using you in the vernacular, when you seem to get caught in potentially villainous deeds, the blame is always, whether you say it in this way or not, the blame is always on the general out there intelligence. It was not your personal, individual intelligence that led you to become involved with this particular villainous deed. No one. I don't know whether you're aware of it. Well, some of you got to be by now. It's not important, per se, but just to drive the point home, because sometimes it makes people's eyes water. A Mussolini, a Joseph Stalin, they did not sit down and go, well, let's see, what can I do evil today? And I'll accept the fact that historically, they say Stalin would go out there and just, in 24 hours, burn down and slaughter a whole village, 10,000 people, just because, get them out of there. We don't have enough potatoes to go around. I'm not questioning, let's say you did it. But can any of you get any glimpse, the way that life works? Forget now these phony baloney individuals of me and you on the surface. A Stalin, no one sits around and says, I got enough men, I could kill that whole little village over there. God, that'd be evil. Jesus, I'll go down in the Hall of Fame of villains. That is not, life doesn't operate anywhere in that line, because the forces, the energies that work life, current operating AC or DC, whether you're talking about resistance, whether you're talking about the flow of electrons, whether you're talking about the operations of your own nervous system, whether you're talking about being stupefied, whether you're unconscious, the energy is neutral. The dance going on, the confrontation, where it overlaps, is what creates life. So when an individual, when you seem to get caught, now it doesn't matter, it's not to me to define, if you just seem to get caught, in other words, you feel guilty, you feel defensive, that somebody says, ooh, I heard you did so-and-so, what a despicable act. And it strikes you that, wait a minute, I got to defend this. That you don't even like the sound of it. You know the thing, just being ordinary. When that's true, all you got to do is look at you. And think about me saying Joseph Stalin or anybody. You did not plan, although the deed may appear right now that somebody says, I can't believe you did that. And you realize what they're saying and how it looks, and you go, oh. Think about Stalin. Stalin never sit around as far as somebody said, what a horrible thing you did. And him go, oh. So what you do is, no, wait a minute, I didn't plan to do that. And you're right. But if that's right about you, I got news for you, it's right about Stalin. When you say, no, I did not plan to do an evil deed. It was not my intent in any manner to be villainous in this situation. And yet, I see some validity in what you just said. Whether you say it or not, if you're trying to defend yourself, there's some validity. There is a necessary energy flow that's making you respond to it. So it would appear to be, I know this is still pretty sticky, but it would appear to be that the intelligence involved that motivated, that supported this potentially villainous deed that you seem to have been engaged in was not your intelligence personally. It was some kind of intelligence of the world itself, of other people's intelligence. That is their influence, things that they've done. That had to be it. And withal, as I already pointed out, when you look upon life outside of you, the general intelligence of others, or the institutional intelligence on a larger scale, if indeed it seems to have been engaged in some horrendous, villainous activity, you still are wont to credit it with having ordinary intelligence. It's got to have been temporarily insane. There's got to be some kind of physical flaw. They have got to be suffering some kind of brain damage, because they could not do it either, individually or institutionally. I'm trying to remember this. Those of you that got most of you have had some little grasp of this in the past, is to remember that C and D, for instance, what seems to be constructive and destructive forces, as observed by two-dimensional sight, C and D and all other forces, those I mentioned and those I haven't mentioned, are always overlapping. They're always overlapping. They're always bonding. And what they do is serve to fuel and light up that which we call existence. Without a steady knowledge of this, there is no such thing possible as HDT. You're not going to find yourself engaged in any kind of high-definition thinking, because you will continue to look, as you're supposed to with ordinary intelligence, in one direction. One eye sees constructive activities going on, another eye sees destructive activities, and the twain can never meet. A villain can have no redeeming features. Well, I know that they try every now and then. A movie, the anti-heroes, they were called for a while in Hollywood. But notice, real villains, in general, throughout history, in literature, now movies, everywhere, real villains cannot be allowed. Nobody thinks about it, but they can't be allowed to have much in the way of redeeming features. It's very rare. I know what happens, but remember, life will try anything. But it's very rare, as you know, for there to be some villain, be a gangster movie, a dope dealer, a mad dog serial killer, some bloodthirsty historical figure. The movie can go on 2 or 3 hours, spend $40 million on it, and apparently try and do some kind of character development, as they call it. But the real villains of the movie cannot be allowed, even though I was going to admit that every now and then they'll show. Remember the Frankenstein monster, the original movie. It's not the story, but at least I saw the movie. The monster, after he's wrecked all this havoc in a 49 Hudson, he finds this little girl. And in fact, they cut out, I found out, they cut out 2 or 3 minutes that now supposedly people are buying videos and they're pushing it again, that the original Frankenstein, whoever produced it, that they have put back in some scenes of him and this little girl that they thought distracted too much, but still had him picking her up and holding the little girl, and, you know, her hair, and I think she dropped something in the water and he pulled it out for her. It doesn't fit. But I know every now and then they'll show Al Capone, in between killing people, he'll pull a thorn out of a dog's paw. And they'll show that kind of little thing just for a split second. But notice they don't stay with it. Or they'll show that he calls his mother once a week, like a good boy. But it's just like that. And it's like they won't do it a little bit, and they just do it, and it's almost like sticking out your tongue at the Pope or something. They'll throw in a little something like that in the movie, and then it's just gone. They can't allow themselves, that is, life will not allow, three-dimensional intelligence will not allow any kind of humane character development of a villain. Do you follow? It's the same thing from another view that I'm telling you, that in science fiction that seems to have, you would think, more license than trying to do the life, even if it's a fictitious version of Al Capone. That now you can make up. You don't have to make up an Al Capone. You make up a damn creature that nobody's ever seen before. And it's still same limits. The thing cannot be allowed to have what seems to be ordinary middle-class bourgeoisie intelligence and be a villain. Can't be done. Now all of you know, maybe you people are just seeing this on tapes the first few times, I know it's quite easy that you could have all kinds of strange ideas of what you think I'm talking about, but you're missing it. It has to do with the fact that the human intellect is constrained, the way it is made is constrained in such a way that all you can do is see that everything is either chocolate or vanilla. And that's the way it's supposed to be. That things, yes, it's either my opinion or it's not my opinion. It's either my personal inner life or it's not my personal inner life. There is this frontier. And it's obviously a frontier of the great organ of the skin between you and other human, but there is that kind of frontier between hippopotami, between mongooses, between mongoose, between one mongoose and another mongoose. But then, the interesting, for someone who is following this, the more interesting is it gets into the realm that would appear to be the invisible, the intellect. Then it would seem that intellects do not have those same kind of physical boundaries, that there is a physical boundary between you and other humans, between all physical creatures, which seems reasonable enough, or we'd all merge together and would turn into goo. But then we'd think, well, wait a minute, intellects can intertwine. There is no absolute frontiers. For instance, when people agree, when people say, they discuss some subject, somebody says, well, my opinion is so-and-so, and the person says, well, tell me a little more, and they describe a little more, and they go, damn it, I never understood that before, and it's like some kind of agreement. A world with no frontiers. Really? Really? Well, why are there letters then? Frontiers of words. Why are there varying opinions? Why cannot men perceive through their ordinary intellect of a villain with a living, breathing intellect that's plotting his evil deeds, that he intellectually decides to do it? Why is it, the other, at least the edge of the same coin, why is it that true villains, once they are depicted, once you thought about it, you don't have to write a book, but you're just thinking about villainous people, that you cannot attribute to them, you cannot allow them to have much in the way of ordinary humanity. It can't be done. You can't have it both ways. If you're ordinary, you cannot even perceive of it. Where they overlap, though, is where you can strike it rich. Where they overlap is what one eye by itself can't see, and it's what two eyes by themselves can't see, because where things overlap, even physically, is almost out of focus. That's not what's important. But this is strictly true when you start talking about the dialogue inside of the human nervous system, inside the human brain, that there is a talker and there is a listener. Sometimes they both seem to be quiet, but they're both looking. There are two views going on in the brain, or else you could not think. They overlap. They overlap in you, they overlap in everybody, and they overlap in you and everybody. Well, back to the main subject. What the hell was it? I wanted to pick up a piece from the last time we taped. And I told you that you could take it as another unknown suggestion, all right, law, that we do not live, we do not exist where we think we do. The ordinary intellectual concept of where you are, like everything else, is dimensionally lacking. You do internally, it can't be helped, can't be avoided. You do partially exist where you think you do, but that doesn't count for enough. You cannot explore any new territory when you accept your home base as being a place that is only partially as you perceive it. In other words, you believe inside that you live somewhere. Now, I don't mean your street address. In here. That yes, well, you've got to. You've got to be you. You'd be nuts. You'd be in a home. You got to be stable enough to pass for ordinary to ever even get here and come to meetings or go watch these tapes. But where you think you live internally is not where you live. Nobody. It's partially where you live, but you are dimensionally impaired in what you think about. Everybody is at the old level. So it is a true fact that no one lives. We do not. We do not live where we think we do. We do not exist where we think we do, and it doesn't matter where you think you do. Inside where you think you exist is the premise that seems to be you. It is your thoughts. It is your intelligence that makes you you. Now, I know that the rest of you is you too. Your arms, your legs, and your body, your smells, your beat up feet, your crooked finger, your big nose, all that's you. But you would not be you, the human, without the intellect. That is where you feel as though where you live. And even people who think, well, wait a minute, I'm more concerned, this is the way I am, I'm more concerned about my body. In other words, I think more about how ugly I am or how big my nose is. I think more about that. That is more of where I live inside. Now, it may sound weird. I can't help it. All my life I've worried about how skinny I am, how big my nose is. And so that would sound to be that that person is not living intellectually, right? They're physically. Wrong. Because if they did not have the intellect, they would not know they had a big nose. They would not know that they're skinny. If you did not have an intellect, you could not have any sensation that you live anywhere else except the intellect. Do you follow? In other words, people, I'm saying that where you think you live, whereas it's not where you live, where you think you live is where you think you live intellectually. And it doesn't matter if you were to say, which some people could if they were listening to this, some ordinary people say, wait a minute, I know what you're saying, but that's not true. Because I don't think about what I think. I'm not saying that that's the way I should be, but I'm going to tell you the truth. I think more about the way I look. I do. I worry about it. That's why I think about that more than I think about intellectual matters. So, do you hear? Without the intellect, there would be no problems. There'd be nothing to think about. You would live nowhere except wherever you were physically, and you wouldn't know where that was. You would just be there. Whole world intelligence tells each person, that is through the dialogue, the energy of life itself running through men, culminating in that wonderful organ, the brain, wherein you're making sounds and you take them to be seriously. You think they're words and you think the letters, the combination and the sentences are special. Ah, they're special if you're not very special. This dialogue, this noise internally about where people live, it tells each person that they exist, that is, they're living somewhere, and the somewhere has to be specifically that they're either living here or there. And of course I don't mean that literally, but inside you are either or what. In any given situation you're something, you're some kind of guy. If you have any interest in it, If the talk, that is the energy flowing through this little cocktail party, let's say, turns to politics and people start talking blah, 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 and let's say that you are going to respond, that the energy in life is such in you that you will, given the opportunity. You get close enough, it is the magnetic pull, it is the mutual flows of energy, that you will participate in the conversation. If you are, then you are some kind of guy politically. I guess you could say that, oh, I don't know, I guess in college, I consider myself sort of a new conservative, and now, to tell you the truth, I believe that the political left is weakening in such a degree that blah, blah. And you describe where you think you're living. Or if they just start talking about the success in life, how you're doing with your career, you believe that you exist somewhere specifically, either here or somewhere else. Either in agreement to what they're talking about or in somewhere else. High definition thinking would reveal this, that wherein everybody's intelligence tells them that they either are existing, that is living here, or somewhere else. All right, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm doing pretty well in life, I'm not doing as well as I thought. You do not live either here or somewhere else. You live where everything overlaps. What is being alive but being where things overlap? That's at least to the verbal point I was trying to drag some of you for the last 30 minutes. What is actually being alive? Not just physically, being alive as a human. That is, you've got an intellect going. You are a full functioning human, just in the ordinary middle class bourgeoisie sense. What is being alive but being where things overlap? Because if you're not where things overlap, you're not alive. That is one definition of three-dimensional death. That is one definition, the operations of you not being here. If you were playing with what seems to be backward history prior to your marvelous birth, which gave us all pause to thank Larry, before that, you are not where things are overlapping. Not at this level. Life itself, all right, life itself. Being alive individually is being where things overlap. I might do this. Here I go. It's not simply the extreme of me saying, all right, death, from one quite serious view, one valid view. It's from the three-dimensional view, from us alive here, sensually, that death is where things are not overlapping. You don't have to take it that far, though. In life itself, go outside the middle class, that is the normally sane, everyday people that life uses. Start getting over to the edges of the bell curve. People that are considered by life to be deranged, mentally deficient. It's a gradual process now. It's relative as always. But can you perceive for a little bit that the more people seem to be out of touch with everyday reality, the more they are dealing with areas that there is a lessening of the overlap? Fanatics. People who are walking around, whether it be a fanatic that makes the center stage in the historical sense, politically or somewhere, a man who says, I know what's good, I know what this country should be doing, or this state, all the way from that to some guy walking around the street wrapped in army blankets pushing an old grocery cart, and he says he's talking to God, or he says he is God. Now don't just discount that. What I want you to see is, when you start getting outside the extreme, and don't worry about why he did it. There is no why, or why he's like that. But you recognize he is not considered to be a fully functioning, intelligent human being. And part of the description, forget attempted psychological determinations of them trying to classify neuroses and psychoses, he or she is gradually getting into an area where there are fewer things overlapping. And their intellect tells them, the energy that is running through their dialogue tells them that things are very clear cut. It may only be one or two things that interest them, like, I am God. or God talks to me every day. And you try to say, well, look, wait a minute. You can't fully believe that, do you? Certainly. In other words, they can't apparently consider no alternative. They say, well, you really believe that God talks to you? Do you think He talks to other people? Nope, He told me He didn't. Well, would you consider that maybe you just hear voices, or maybe you're sick and need help? A man who talks to God doesn't need help. I don't need help. I mean, would you consider maybe that you need psychiatric care? Do you hear me? That's not death in the physical sense, but that's getting close to a kind of intellectual extreme illness, because they are no longer dealing with the same kind of rich, complex overlapping that ordinary intelligence deals with. I'll repeat to you again. What is being alive, if you can begin to see it, but being where things overlap? That is being alive. And it is not seen as that. It is seen contrarily, whenever it's discussed, as being the stress of life, the conflicts of life, the bad guys in life, the dumb people in life. So how come life can't get straightened out? And of course, one of the ideas, if you can hear it, one of the intellectual concepts that life is given through man besides God is a potential afterlife of paradise, of heaven. And what is it? It's a place of almost no overlaps, place of no contrast. It would be a place where things do not overlap. And you get there, and it's the same kind of crap you put up with down here. In other words, you went to all this trouble to be a good Presbyterian and paid the big bucks, and you got there, and I'll be damned if you're not surrounded by Catholics and Jews and Baptists just like you were here, right? You don't want that overlap. Get up there, and it'll be nothing but us Presbyterians, thank you. That is not life. That is not being alive. And the ordinary intellect, and the way in which life feeds it now, can't even see what I'm talking about, cannot see the flaw in that, could not see any alternative to it, because the only alternative it could see would be, well, all right, the opposite would have to be the alternative. Right, yeah. Boy, geniuses. But while I was talking about intellect to start with, my term of late, of the new intellect, you understand, would be where all things, to your perception, because they already do, but your perception of things, all things overlapping, all opposites, all twins, all objects, all processes, all nouns, all verbs, all in here's, all out there's, all personally specific, all general, it's where they all overlap, which they do anyway, but they overlap now in your brain, in your neural perception. The energies you're taking in are now energies that are normally running on parallel courses. Of course, the ordinary intelligence, once you put words on it, it appears to be energies even running in conflict. That you're able now to see that Turkey exists right on top of Borneo. The North Pole is in the same damn location as the South Pole. And that the most horrendous people in the world are the same people as Saint Assisi. Not theoretical, not in words, not in 3D reality. The energy of it. There is no new intelligence anywhere this side of that. Of course, I said that, which shows that it has some premise, doesn't it? So, if you knew what you're doing, you'd realize to discount that. And as long as I'm there, the place that you have got to be intellectually to ever get started is where, by your perception, that you can see that all things are overlapping. That's the way it is. If they're not, they're dead, they're useless. But there is a place beyond that. Beyond that kind of forward history, this kind of verbal mapping of overlaps, there is even a place that's more complex than that. A cuter place, in fact, but it's much more complex than just where everything overlaps. That ordinary intelligence, overworld intelligence cannot see, but there's a place beyond where everything overlaps. And what might that be? That would be where there ain't no premises.